Thank goodness Wonder Egg Priority is back. Just got done watching Wonder Egg Priority episode 9. Really happy to have the series come back. I know it was only a 2 week wait, but it was. I love the show. What can I say? I love the show. But yeah, it was a pretty solid episode to come back to. We did get some kind of insight into Neru. Oddly enough, nothing to do with her sister, which I guess is similar to our situation with Rika, where we thought that we were going to get more backstory of her wallet, but they actually end up pivoting and going, okay, now let's talk about her father that doesn't exist in her life. And that was kind of similar to Nera. Like I said, you would think we get a Nera episode is going to get into her sister, but no, it's like pivot. Let's talk about what she does and another person that's involved in her life, which again, like I said, parallels technically what they did with Rika, which is makes me believe that we're still going to get a Momoe episode that's not going to be about her uncle or her, experience with girls or her Haruka, the girl that she's trying to save. But yes, very interesting episode. Kind of gets. I don't know. I almost want to say. I mean, we're talking about a show that's about girls that go into Dream World and hatch eggs that are girls that mistakenly ended their life. And I'm gonna say this about Neru, but yeah, Neru has kind of always been that oddity about the show. She's like the most non-realistic character in the show itself. So it does technically fit in the idea that her story is going to be a little bit out there. But yeah, it kind of opens up really quickly, getting into the more sci-fi realms where apparently the company that she owns, that she heads, has the ability to see people's dreams. And so they've actually caught footage of Neru fighting in her dream. And this was all kind of in lieu of them going to visit Neru's home. There was kind of a cute little scene where everybody's like not believing the idea that Neru wants them to come visit her home, but yeah, she invites them to come to her home, and which is technically a corporation. It's not really home. It's more of a skyscraper, so to speak. But when they arrive there, like I said, they show the footage. They have this technology to see their dreams, and then they quickly pivot to going to Neru's living space at the time. I wouldn't really call it her home, her living space at the time, which is a medical floor of the facility. Which when they come in, you see a bunch of little stretchers and windows. You can see into these locations, which are a little bit odd. I'm like, okay, there's a hospital floor, a medical floor, and yet they're taking Neru to the hospital when she gets injured. I guess they're not really heavily staffed at this location, which technically makes sense the more you get into this particular episode. But yeah, that was interesting. Momoe brought a takoyaki set and was kind of hoping to use it, which was kind of funny. But yeah, when they get there, they come to Neru's her living space, her room, and it is just covered with books, as you would kind of expect. Her assistant had described her as being a plati, which is like a genius, and specifically with this case, a Japanese plati. And so she's a genius, has like a huge amount of knowledge. She also reveals to the group that she was born through artificial insemination. She doesn't really have parents, so she was. It's almost like they're insinuating that she's a genius that's kind of bred to be a genius. As we find out later, there's another girl that is similar to her that they get into as well. When they all kind of get settled, we have a little brief moment of everybody kind of revealing their dreams. We had Rika kind of reveal that she's thinking of going overseas and being an exchange student or something, and meeting a hot foreigner and getting married. Uh, Momoe, they were kind of, it kind of got brought up because they were talking about, because they all decided to do some, um, you know, painting each other's nails and printing each other up, and they were saying how Momoe was so good at that, and she's like, no, I was actually thinking of being a dietitian. Uh, Ayoto didn't really seem like she really had any kind of plan. She's kind of mentioned that she wants to just live on her own. That's really all she's kind of shooting for. But of course, the target ended up coming towards Neru and what she wants to do, and she's kind of like, no, I think I'm just gonna stay where I'm at. they're all kind of a little surprised by, you don't really have any desire to, do something different, go out and do something different. She's like, no, I'm going to be staying here, and that's because of this thing I'm going to show you. Which she goes and she pulls this curtain back, and there's a girl inside of like a chamber, like a life support chamber. And she points out, this is uh, Kotobuki. She is another one of these Platis, and she specifically is a doctor of psychiatry. She was performing experiments regarding near-death experiences. And apparently, when she was doing these experiments, she eventually didn't come back. She didn't awaken from it and her test of it. And Neru kind of reveals that she went into a dream with her at some point. But it was recent because she did have the snake with her. She helped her fight against it. And the entire time, this girl, Kotobuki, with her is kind of making remarks about their relationship and everything they've been through and what she was trying to, figure out with this whole situation. The entire time they're being chased around by a doctor, scientist named Dr. Seki, and he's upset at Kotobuki because she took the job that she was planning on having at this medical center. And so as she's kind of they're being chased around, like I said, they're kind of sussing out their relationship and what they've been through, and eventually getting to the point where Kotobuki kind of reveals some things about this whole element of giving up their life. Like we've mentioned before in the previous episodes, they were talking about how this whole Wonder Egg system was built around the idea of undoing these regretful ending of their lives. That girls are kind of built around a very quick decision that's often manipulated by the words of others. And this whole process is to fix that. But Kotobuki herself was specifically mentioning the temptation of death, as they call it, the innocent sorrow. And she said stage 4 of the Thanatos smelled like sweet honey. And this temptation of death is something they end up bringing up later when we see the assistant of Neru talking to Akka and Uraka about how Neru is getting closer to the truth behind the temptation of death. And now it finally happens. We finally get our Kyubey moment where we go, yeah, this isn't all as clear cut as we originally thought it was. And we're finally starting to get to the episodes where we get them slowly piecemealing in. Now let's show you exactly what's happening in the background. And they said something to the effect that the assistant said something to the effect of she gave her an excuse to deflect her from the truth. And Uraka and Akka specifically say at this point that, yeah, if they know the truth behind what causes the temptation of death, no one would want to fight. No one would ever want to take part in this if they knew what was actually triggering this. And they said specifically that only they two know. We would assume would be Uraka and Akka. Not even the assistant that is talking to them knows what this is. But they're specifically pointing out the phrase innocent sorrow. I guess it's technically kind of implying there's some kind of trigger that is happening that I'm not sure exactly what innocent sorrow is going to mean specifically to it, other than the idea that it has to be someone that is innocent, which would be typically in this case very young women that are being triggered by this specifically. But going back during this whole fight sequence, this Dr. Seki keeps mentioning the idea that they're guinea pigs, which definitely kind of connects it to the fact that these are these Plati, which are like these geniuses that are kind of seemingly lab manufactured geniuses. Their sole purpose is to be geniuses to advance technologies and test out different theories. In this case, with her testing out near-death experiences. And then towards the later part of it, Kotobuki pretty much gets pretty clear with Neru that, look, I'm done at this point. I want you to basically turn off the life support, finish it. I'm done. I'm dead. I'm gonna move on, kind of thing. And she knows perfectly well that the government's gonna come for her body, and she's not liking the idea of the government, testing on her body and doing things with her. So she wants her to end it. And of course, this is at a point where Neru gets very emotional, which is something we don't really see much of. Neru getting very emotional. Kotobuki pretty much kind of points out the idea that, you have friends now. And Neru's like, how do you know that? And she's like, well, because you're soft now. Obviously, you have friends now. You're acting differently. You're very emotional in this situation. And of course, Neru's upset this idea that you're just leaving all this burden upon me. You're leaving me behind, kind of situation. So yeah, very very interesting to see kind of this different side of Neru, and hopefully this kind of emotional outbreak is definitely going to be something that's going to trigger a change in her going in the future. After the kind of combat sequence ends and you kind of jump back to the group, Neru's like, it's my decision to turn this off. And of course, everybody has their opinions about this, especially Rika and Momoe. They're very against it. Momoe especially. It's like, no, this isn't your choice. You can't do this. I'm going to stop you. And she's like, well, why are you stopping me? Well, because you're a friend. You're about to do something that you're probably going to regret. And after they kind of get excused and told to leave, Ai Oto ends up, of course, going back to Neru. And they kind of point out the fact that, she can get in there. Don't worry about it. If anybody's going to be able to get in there to talk to her, it's going to be Ai. And Ai goes back there and kind of speaks with her and talks to her about the whole situation. And this is a kind of a point where Neru gets a realization that, she's not very clear about things. She needs to be more clear. That way people can understand how she feels. And that's something that Ai ends up kind of digging out of her. And a very interesting point they had in this particular scene with the two of them is Ai brings up an experience that she had with Koito. That they were in the classroom one day and they brought out a kokori, which is, for those that don't know, is kind of similar to Ouija. And they'll ask a question of kokori and they'll put their finger on a coin and it'll slide across the board to answer it. And specifically, Koito was wanting to know if the person that she loved her too. And I knew it was going to be, or was assuming it was Sawaki, but she didn't really say anything at the time. And she said that the coin went to yes. And she immediately thought that Koito did it, because Koito had a very happy look on her face. Obviously, wouldn't be a face if she's the one that did it. But I wasn't sure if she was the one that did it because she wanted Koito to be happy. And it's kind of this realization with that story that she told. They come to the conclusion that they were going to, go through with this, do what she wished, and, put her to rest. And the final kind of interesting thing they bring up after this scene was a quick shot to Aka and Uraka. And Aka specifically asked Uraka if he was the one, or if he knew, or he said that the next day the government came to pick up her body. And he asks Uraka if he gave Neru the egg of Kotobuki, or was it coincidence? Like, did you give her this egg? Did you create this egg for her so that she would essentially put her to rest and that the government wouldn't be able to get the body and that she would have regrets of it, basically? It's a very interesting... I mean, it technically made sense that this was going to be like a manufacturing. They're manufacturing these eggs and putting these girls in these eggs. But it kind of puts a little bit of a tinge on Aka and Uraka and the idea that they're not just letting things flow naturally, that they are able to manipulate the situation. And it does beg the question. It begs the question of how substantial that's going to be. Are they playing with their emotions? Why would they essentially manipulate the game the way they're manipulating it? So that's episode really does kind of bring up a few really important questions in the end. I mean, yeah, it's really nice to kind of get a little more into Neru and insight into her and her company that she's a part of. But of course, the big questions that are really coming up is what is the company that Neru is a part of and their connection to Akka and Uraka. I'm really hoping it doesn't get into the sci-fi realm where it's more this company has this crazy technology from these geniuses that's able to, create eggs out of the deaths of innocent girls that have ended their own lives. And I kind of like it more to be in the more fantasy realm, but that's just a personal preference. They haven't let me down so far, and I doubt they will. But definitely does kind of bring a question of what kind of connection there is, and I guess there's an ability for there to be a pre-established connection between Akka and Uraka to Neru's assistant, because it seems like what they were doing with Kotobuki may have been related to it in some way. Why was she was specifically looking into near-death experiences? Is it to look into that very close realm into what these girls experience, that essentially all the girls experienced that are involved with was Wonder Egg priority system? So definitely, I guess technically Kotobuki and what she was testing does definitely connect to everything they've been doing up to this point. Just unfortunately with her case, she got so close. She got to that point that she did experience what they call it, the temptation of death, that point that would drive her over that river, over the bridge to that final point, across the boat, the sea. But yeah, of course, the other big question really this episode brings up is a lot to do with that innocent sorrow they're talking about, that trigger point that they claim if these girls knew, they would no longer fight. And I guess this really goes back to my original theory. I'm actually feeling like my theory is going to end up being true. And I don't know when I brought this up. I want to say it was when they brought Momoe into the picture. My theory that I ended up having was that all these girls were the trigger. Because if you think about it, if you have these girls who obviously have lost somebody they love into their own life, and there's a way that they can fix it by doing this system. And if you were to tell me that, yeah, they can fix it by doing this system, but if they found out this one thing, they would no longer do it. Yeah, I guess technically it could be that question they begged, that Rika begged of, they left us. What makes you believe they want to come back? That could be. I doubt it. The innocent sorrow, I doubt that, but that could be a thing. But my thought process is going more in the idea of it confirming my theory that each one of these girls triggered it, and that innocent sorrow is going to be them realizing that they caused it. Because that's the only thing I can think of that would cause them to not want to continue. To find out that you're the one that did it. You're the one that triggered them to end their own life. I guess in both theories it's equal in making sense. One theory being the innocent sorrows is they're the trigger, and that would cause them, if they realize that, they would give up. They'd realize that they're the nasty one. And also the other one being innocent sorrow could just be that they don't want to come back. Which, again, I think it's more my theory. But my original theory was the idea that each one of them was the trigger, and that they're going to eventually find that they're all the bully. I think my original theory was that eventually they're going to go into, one of these girls is going to hatch one of the other girls' target of focus, and that the bully that's going to show up in that world that they're going to have to defeat will be one of the other girls. So, like, if Rika were to get Haruka, which is Momoe's friend that she's trying to save, if Rika were to get the egg that Haruka's in, and she cracked it, Momoe would show up, and she would have to defeat Momoe. If Neru were to get Koito's egg, I would be in that world. And that was my crazy theory, but it's sounding like it may not go that far. But the point is that we will find out that this innocent sorrow is each of these girls realizing they're the trigger. So with, like I mentioned before, I'm going to go through all each one of these. With Ai Oto, she was basically complacent. She's seen a problem arising but did nothing about it. She's seen that Koito loved Sawaki, but Sawaki was giving her Ai attention. And thus Koito seeing this either was jealous to the point of ending her own life, or found herself that she was in sorrow because she couldn't get a Sawaki and Sawaki liked Ai, or that she was jealous and she ended her life because she didn't like being jealous. But either way, Ai is the trigger because she didn't do anything about it. With Neru, we haven't got the full story yet, but she could be the trigger because we don't know what caused her sister to stab her and then run off and jump off a bridge. So she could have easily have started that fight and drove her sister to this point. It could have been her genius that drove her sister to this point. We never know, but she's a cause of it. With Rika, obviously, this is the easiest one. This girl idolized her, and she basically said, "You're fat. I don't want to be seen with you. Go away." With Momoe was the hardest one for me to really say it in a negative way, but technically, Haruka gave herself to Momoe. She stripped herself. She offered everything to her, and Momoe rejected her. And she was so embarrassed she ran off and she ended her life. So each one of them technically is the trigger. To what extent would that be? That's the question. But yeah, my theory still stands. I think it's going to be innocent sorrow is going to be innocents realizing that they're the one that caused this, and they'll be stuck in sorrow from that point. I think that's probably what it's going to end up standing for. But again, like I said, I think it can also be the idea that they'll realize that these girls chose this and they don't really want to be back, which I don't really see as being the case because that completely discredits the whole point that Aka and Uraka originally brought up, which was that this is to undo these mistakes. These are all mistakes that they must undo. So, yeah, a lot of interesting questions though. Like I said, really just kind of piques my interest even more. Unfortunately, we only have another 3 episodes to go with, but I almost want to say that I believe that they needed this time, that almost like they planned that out to have that break with episode 8, and this was a fruit of it. It was definitely a crazy animation-packed episode, but I stopped myself because I think every episode ends up being that. They're just doing an incredible job as always. It looks beautiful. The characters are great. Seeing Neto breaking down was incredible. I did want to point out that I do believe that the character designer for this series is definitely a man of culture, because not only do we have one Heterochromia that Andrew loves so much, I love my Heterochromia, they gave us 2 Heterochromias. The Kotobuki, she was albino. She was a Heterochromia too. So, man of culture, definitely. He knows what a good design is when they pick Heterochromia. So yeah, good stuff. A lot of question marks being thrown at Aka and Uraka. Where I don't want to peg them as being evil yet, because they just seem genuine in what they do so far. I think what they're bringing up with the innocent sorrow is really just a thing of like, if they find out the truth of how this system works, not that they created it that way, that it will discourage them. But I think they're going to find that out. They're obviously going to find out what that is, and then they're going to have to overcome that. But I guess the other big question mark for them is really what they brought up with them giving Neru an egg of Kotobuki, which I don't think necessarily is malicious. I just think it was one of those things where it kind of was wording it in a way that made it seem like it was malicious and ill intent, but it was actually beneficial to Neru. She's seen this. She was able to force to stop some kind of something that she would regret. So, this is one. It's been 2 weeks, and I want to talk about Wonder Egg Priority more. And this episode definitely had a lot of little insights into the world itself. So Let me know in the comments what you think. What do you think the innocent style is going to be? Do you agree with my theory on it, or do you think it's going to be something else? If there's something in this episode that I may have missed, let me know. Definitely appreciate you guys supporting this weekly episode. This is definitely my coverage of Wonder Egg Priority is one of our most popular of the weekly, definitely. And I'm so glad that you guys choose to watch me every week and check out my thoughts on it. Love to hear you guys' feedback and talk about the show. So definitely let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, and that supports us. Leave a like if you can. And I thank you all for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed, and y'all take care. I almost forgot about the stupid Prado chicken comment. I laughed. I laughed a lot. That was good. Prado chicken.